Yellowjackets Season 3 is inconsistent, but the back half improves into a watchable show. This third season of Showtime's hit series continues the story of a 1996 high school girls soccer team stranded in the wilderness after surviving a plane crash, and through a series of unfortunate and further traumatizing events, the girls resort to ritualistic cannibalism, which admittedly isn't a vibe meant for every potential viewer, but definitely is a vibe for sick fucks like myself. And that's even before mentioning how gay this show is. And I mean that as a compliment. But unfortunately, Yellowjackets Season 3 lacks the consistent high-quality writing that was present in the previous two seasons. Mostly because Yellowjackets Seasons 1 and 2 were written with incredible tonal consistency. They functioned as dramas with horror elements and a bit of dark humor sprinkled in, which all befitted the show's subject matter and thematic storytelling regarding trauma and how people cope with post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD rather. After all, Yellowjackets is like Lost, but in reverse. In fact, Lost told the story of plane crash survivors stranded in a wilderness that may or may not have something supernatural about it, and utilized flashbacks in order to inform the audience about the backstories of its various protagonists. But Yellowjackets, while clearly inspired by Lost, flips this script. The plane crash resulting trauma and debates about the supernatural element in the wilderness occur in the distant past of 1996 and 1997. You know, the era of the Beanie Baby. In other words, the wilderness sections are the flashbacks, meaning that present day in the 2020s follows the now middle-aged survivors handling the fallout of their actions and realizing that their trauma causes the horrid events fate inflicted upon them as teenagers and the resulting cannibalistic tendencies to lay dormant inside of them. It just never really leaves them, because the survivors may have escaped the wilderness, but the wilderness still exists in their collective psyche, forcing them to relive their trauma. Personally though, I think they need to toughen the fuck up. Human flesh is hardly the worst thing that can be consumed, because tasty human meat is of higher quality than the meat that can be found at your local Taco Bell. This joke was written by Armie Hammer. And joking aside, this was enthralling to watch. The story in Yellowjackets' first two seasons was structured in a way so that the events of the past instilled a certain sense of impending dread in the audience. If anything, we fret over the fates of these characters, some of which we already likely know will meet a tragic and grisly demise, and some whose potential mortal outcomes remain a mystery. And to add on to that, there's also the question of whether or not the supernatural entity that the young girls are attempting to appease with blood sacrifices is even real, or just something that they collectively fabricated after experiencing some truly terrible events. Which, hey, no judgment here. I started a cannibalistic cult after playing Marvel's The Avengers. That game fucking sucks. And someone had to pay for its crimes. In other words, the past setting in Yellowjackets is very engaging on a narrative level. These past events fuel the drama in the show's 2020 present-day setting. Because obviously, what the 2020s really needed was more fucking drama. See, Yellowjackets scenes occurring in the 2020s feature these traumatized, now middle-aged women self-destructing their personal lives as the supernatural presence, whether a real phenomena or psychological manifestation, never really vacated the survivor's mental headspace, reflecting the experiences of those of us afflicted with PTSD in real life. Because, you know, real-life PTSD maintains a grip on our psyche even after we chucked our lived traumatic predicaments in the rearview mirror. It just stays with us. And Yellowjackets' first two seasons firmly understands this truth, thus achieving high-quality narrative and thematic storytelling with impressive consistency. Yellowjackets Season 3, however, struggles to maintain that said consistency. While this third go-around with our Yellowjackets, both the younger ones in the 1990s and the middle-aged ones in the 2020s, are played well by a great ensemble cast, the overall mystique and mystery evolves in unpredictable ways, and once again, as stated at the start of this video, Season 3's back half is far superior to its front half. This season is very uneven, with the two primary reasons being the lack of tonal consistency and a faulty execution of concept. Two issues that intertwine with one another as if it were narrative incest, thus causing the quality of Season 3's writing to be a few tiers below seasons 1 and 2. For a few examples, Shauna's daughter Callie and the former wellness cult leader Lottie both bond with each other, which isn't necessarily a problem in concept for the story that Yellowjackets Season 3 is attempting to tell, but it becomes a flaw when its two characters start singing and dancing to music whilst cooking dinner because it's cringy and out of character for both of them, but Callie especially. Teenage girls have too much self-respect for that, and that's saying something. Then there's the montage sequences that are haphazardly cobbled together because montages to upbeat 90s music doesn't really befit Yellowjackets' overall tone, all to the point that these aforementioned montage sequences feel clumsily overstated. Then there's how one of the first sequences of the season showcases the young Yellowjackets playing Capture the Flag, a scene which also features an out-of-place 90s song. There's a theme here, which is also tonally bizarre. That's another theme here. And yes, I know that these characters are teenage girls, and the winners and losers of the game decide who has camp duties for the day and such, but it also just doesn't make logical sense in the narrative because they have all experienced trauma, seen people die, and devoured tasty human flesh without salt and pepper. No relation. Sure, I understand, as was said by the great philosopher Cyndi Lauper, that girls just want to have fun. But even with that said, this sequence is really out of left field. Yes, I'm aware that they need to do group bonding activities in order to distract themselves from the whole cannibalism murder thing, but playing Capture the Flag, especially as like an opening sequence, is just tonally incongruent with the show itself. It'd be like if Batman and the Joker tried to settle their differences with a very competitive bout of Halo 3 multiplayer. In other words, it just doesn't feel natural here, unlike my tits. Speaking of the awkward Capture the Flag sequence, teen Shauna instills a rageful grudge within herself for the whole season after being on the losing team, which is a very strange thing to be angry about. Like, sure, thematically I understand that Shauna completely lost her sanity in season 2 after her baby died amidst childbirth, but still season 3's story could have done a better job weaving those two narrative threads together. It could have made the connection. Then there's how this season, and a lot of people within this story's fabricated world, forget that Ty was a well-known local politician, which creates a bit of a plot hole when people don't recognize her, given that she could potentially become wanted for manslaughter. But hey, never overestimate how well informed the average American voter is. There's how the wilderness is very odd in the ways it makes its presence known in the 2020 setting, selecting people for death and sending signals that don't really feel very diegetic to the narrative. Then there's some sequences where survivors essentially get high on natural elements and trip balls as if they were listening to Dope Smoker. Great fucking album, by the way. Which once again isn't a problem conceptually because the supernatural element in the wilderness, if it exists, appears to be using these trippy dreams as a way to plant precognitive visions in the heads of certain survivors, but unfortunately these sequences don't really fit in with the show's overall darker tone, and one of those said visions involves a talking llama, of which I have named Carl. Then there's the over-elaborate trial sequence where our beloved cannibal cult puts someone on trial for wrongdoing, which once again isn't a problem in concept, but becomes an issue in execution because the lady cult's clear obsession to court decorum is just a bit much. I guess Law and Order Cannibal Cult Edition is true to procedure here. And then finally, there's a major time skip, both in the show's past 1990s setting and its present-day 2020 settings, between the conclusion of Season 2 and the beginning of Season 3, which was irritating because Yellowjackets' prior two seasons slowly but surely escalated its tension, character development, and narrative progression in a believable, natural way. And while sure there was also a time skip between the end of Season 1 and the beginning of Season 2, the second season's time skip differs from Season 3's time jump because the second season hits the ground running with elements that were put into place by the end of the first season. In the present-day setting, Ty won an election for political office at the end of Season 1, and thus begins Season 2 in office. Shauna committed murder at the end of Season 1, and thus begins Season 2 removing all evidence that she committed that said murder. Misty also ends season 1 by covering up Shauna's murder, and thus starts season 2 by pressuring Shauna to remove all the evidence. And Natalie ends season 1 being kidnapped, and thus begins season 2 still being kidnapped. And then in the past 1990 setting, season 1 ended with a tragic character death and a snowfall signaling that winter has come, as foretold by prophecy. And thus season 2 begins with ideas that we associate with winter. You know, because everyone is stuck in a cabin, they're hungry because there's a lack of game to hunt, and also it's cold now. Which is very believable because I don't know if you know this, but winter is fucking cold. Just ask Jackie. In other words, the time jump between seasons 1 and 2 feel logical, whereas season 3's time skip doesn't really work, mostly because that prior aforementioned authentic storytelling advancement was missing for 6 weeks worth of showtime, and a lot fucking happened during that time span. In the present day 2020 setting, Ty and Van ended season 2 with their relationship up in the air, but begin season 3 firmly and clearly together, even to the point of doing a dine and dash. And look, I'm all in on Ty and Van being all in on each other, but the jump from point A to B was really fast here. Yes, I know Van is dying from the cancer that the script gave her, so time is of the essence, but that's still a lot, especially considering that Ty doesn't even bring up her ex-partner or her son all that much, which is very weird and very much so a narrative oversight. As for Misty, she begins the season still grieving Natalie's death, which makes sense, but what is illogical is that she, the careful and meticulous brain-over-brawn woman, gets into a drunken bar fight, which doesn't really compute with me. It's about as believable as Steve Urkel running an Italian crime family. And then there's how Shauna, after much consternation, allows Lottie into her home, even though Lottie attempted to murder her at the end of season 2. And yes, I know it was a The Wilderness chose sort of thing, but I'd still hold a fucking grudge. I mean, The Wilderness chose to give me a cock and balls, so fuck that asshole. But anyway, the point, season 3's present day 2020's time skip just doesn't really work. And unfortunately, the 1990s time skip between seasons 2 and 3 is even worse. Well, it's because at the end of season 2, the survivors' cabin burnt to the ground, all while they were still trying to survive the winter. Sure, it burnt down in the back end of winter, but it was still winter. There would definitely be some problems. Yet season 3 sees our survivors having already rebounded because, off-screen, they created their own society with little huts, stages, animal pens, and deeper physical ties to their superstitions about the wilderness, at least in terms of appearance, outfit, and traditions, all while the amount of skepticism in their faith has also increased. Which was honestly kind of weird because, at the end of season 2, most of the girls were on board Team Cannibal Corpse. In other words, a lot occurred during this time jump. Too much even, you know, because how did they all come together to build this little village during a harsh winter? Why do they embrace their faith in the supernatural to the point of dressing like they're part of a cult even more so now than in season 2? Especially considering that many of the girls are wilderness skeptical survivors, which includes Natalie, the village's leader. As I said, I had questions. So yeah, once again, a lot happens during this time skip, even to the point where there's some unnatural expository dialogue where the show, using the characters, addresses details and events occurring during the time skip that we, the audience, weren't privy to, but comes across clunkily due to how the characters in the show had already experienced this shit. You know, because they were there and don't need to discuss old news. Like, I know there's not a lot to do when stranded in the Canadian wilderness, but teenage girls got better shit to do. So yeah, Yellowjackets season 3 time skips just didn't work at fucking all, and when combined with all the other listed issues, most of which occur in the season's front half, it was difficult for me to become grounded in this narrative. The season was just really imperfect. But to Yellowjackets' credit, season 3 improves from episode to episode, all to the point where the back half of the season rediscovers the show's sense of quality. In fact, there are major narrative reveals and twists, some very interesting character turns for both adult Shauna and teen Shauna in regards to their psychological makeup. The entire ensemble cast is fantastic as well, and the season really plays around with whether or not the characters, both in the past and the present, really believe in the wilderness as an entity, or if they participate in the violence while still being skeptical, which allows the psychological implications for both of these stances to be really fascinating. Like, are they all in on this cult, or do they only commit violence due to peer pressure? Or worse, even because they feel a need to indulge in it. In conclusion, Yellowjackets Season 3 is an enjoyable show in its back half. But does that make Yellowjackets Season 3 good? Unfortunately, no. Sure, Season 3's back half ensures that this go-around isn't a lost cause and remains worthy of watching, but I can't really ignore the major blemishes in the front half of the season and those that do also appear in the back half as well, just not as often. Because, like, don't get me wrong, Yellowjackets Season 3 eventually averages as being pretty solid, but I can't call it good when the front half is so inconsistent and filled with so many flaws, especially as it pertains to writing and structure, because overall the body of Season 3's script needed more time to cook in the oven, or pyre rather, ultimately causing Season 3 to be Yellowjackets' worst season. But also, that's just my opinion. Tell me what you thought of Yellowjackets' third season, as well as Yellowjackets as a series, in the comments below. Also, tell me what you think of cannibalism. I would really like to know. Also, please like this video and subscribe to my channel, as that helps boost my videos in the almighty algorithm, and I'd appreciate it a lot. Like, seriously, I want to thank you. Now. Also, please drink plenty of water, especially if you take Adderall like I do. It's a truly necessary component of life. Alright, bye.